All right, chiropractors, welcome to another podcast. So today we're going to talk about how to grow your practice, how to make sure that it's recession proof, how to make sure that it's pandemic proof, and make sure that you always have a solvent and growing business so you never have to worry. You don't have to go through those periods of famine and feast, right? It just should look like this all the time. It should always increase, okay? So I want to tell you why you should believe me in this, all right? So I have run multiple $6 million a year practices, okay? $6 million a year that see over 1,000 patients a week. And all of those patients got the benefit of being exposed to chiropractic, all right? And in order to do that, it did not require rocket science. So let me break down to you what has happened, okay, over the course of chiropractic history. And it's not a good thing. And it's part of the reason why 78% of you who open a new practice will fail. So what has happened when it comes to growing a practice, making sure that your practice is sustainable over the long term, is that you guys have piggybacked knowledge off of past chiropractors who were successful, and those successful chiropractors are setting a glass ceiling on you. Like chiropractors who have $1 million chiropractic business are considered massive, okay, in the chiropractic realm. And why is that? They're considered massive because everybody is piggybacking knowledge off of chiropractors, right? So it's like 130 years ago, the profession was created, and every single year there's chiropractors that come out and they base what is success based on their predecessor, right? Or what other chiropractors say. In nowhere else, in not only the healthcare industry, but in the business world, is that the truth. If that was the case, we would not have companies that are worth $2 trillion or more. We would never have that. And the reason is because in the real business world and in the other healthcare sector, which is a dinosaur that we can get into that later, that's not what people do. They look at what creates the most opportunity in the moment, okay? And so they sell like that, they market like that, they deliver like that, and they manage their finances like that. What they're looking for is what can create the biggest market share for our business. And that is how chiropractors must look at it. And we have to get you out of this thinking that I can only do what other chiropractors have done. And if I do that, then I'm going to be successful, right? And I'm telling you, as someone who has run $6 million a year clinics, that is not the way. All the clinics that I went in to run were owned and run by chiropractors, right? And none of them surpassed $1 million a year, right? And they were considered Goliaths in the chiropractic space, right? $1 million clinic for a chiropractic office was massive, right? But I didn't go in with that thought. I went in as a business person, right? And when you go in and you look at something as a business, it doesn't matter what it provides. It doesn't matter whether you're producing widgets, cars, food, any sort of other service, healthcare, whatever. It needs to be viewed as a business, okay? And where do you learn business principles? Well, you certainly didn't learn them in chiropractic college, unfortunately. Maybe you had a class on them, but you did not spend years and years and years and years climbing the corporate ladder, being exposed to high-level business information that you can deploy and be able to get a really good framework about what actually works to grow a business in this world, right? And that's just the truth. And it's not your fault, right? The expectation that providers should run businesses is not a great expectation. There's a reason that HCA, which has like 180 hospitals, and Ascension, which has like 130 something hospitals, are so big. And that's because the people at the reins of the business are business people, right? So they've had a leg up. They've gone to school. They've probably done their MBA. But more important than that, more important than education, because that's theory until you get into the real world. What they've had exposure to is ever increasing knowledge to business information and trial, failure, fix, right? That's all they did. They tried, they failed, they fixed. They tried, they failed, they fixed. And that led them to get to a point where they could be a C-suite of executives that run these massive healthcare organizations. If you look at the massive healthcare organizations, they are not run by providers. Yeah, they may have a CMO, like a chief medical officer, but the business is not run by providers. And there's a reason for that, because in the healthcare world, there's a tension going on, right? And you probably feel this as an owner. One side is like, I need to make profit. That's the business side. And the other side is I need to do what's optimal for the patient. And that's the other side of it, right? It's called a healthcare business. So you have a healthcare, right? A healthcare business, and that's high empathy. And then you have a business, And this is high profit, right? Like I'm a gladiator. I need to get profit. Well, let me kind of unpack this a little bit for you, okay? So let's say you have two personas, right? Persona number one is the high driven nurturer, right? So the person that I kind of want you to imagine is like, this is like a grandma, right? A grandma who absolutely loves her grandchildren, who will do anything for her grandchildren and is driven to care for them, right? In any way possible. She'll make them meals. She'll wipe their butt. She'll pick up the clothes. She'll spoil them with gifts. She'll make sure that they are cared for in every aspect, okay? That's the provider, right? Most of you went to school because you want to provide care for people, and that's great. Like, we need you. We need that, and we need that side of you. But if you were to take that grandma and you were to put her in an arena of gladiators, how do you think grandma would fare? She wouldn't fare well, right? She would get slaughtered immediately. Well, that's what some of you are doing by having that driven nurturer personality and then entering the healthcare business space. And that's why you're getting slaughtered. That's why 78% of you who open a business will go out of business in the first year, because you're the grandma competing with gladiators. And I don't mean that to offend you. This is not your fault, right? This is not your fault. This is because you did not get the proper education in chiropractic college, potentially in college, and you just didn't spend your time climbing the corporate ladder of business to understand what it takes to grow a business to be wildly successful, right? It just is what it is, right? So we just have to swallow that pill and then get you the information. So that's one persona. The other persona is the gladiator, right? So the gladiator is the person who has lower empathy, not low empathy, but lower empathy. They're more aggressive. They move in a space with like directness, right? They're very direct people. So if you've spoken with C-suite executives of big businesses, most of them are direct. Most of them are introverts. 90% of them are introverts, right? Most providers are extroverts. And their sole focus, their entire focus of their entire career is stacking knowledge about business to leverage that knowledge for more profit, for a bigger business, okay? And the ones who are really good at it excel and move up the executive ladder. Now, this person over here, right, is the gladiator, right? So they go into arenas and do battle with other businesses. And if you think that the marketplace is not like a gladiator arena, you are snoozing. Like, that is what it is. The marketplace is like an arena, right? And all these businesses enter and they're all out for the death of the other business so that they can gain more profit. And whether you like it or not is irrelevant. That is what goes on in the business world. So you have gladiators and you have grandmas, right? And I don't mean that offensively. Gladiator could be just as offensive. And so the other side of that persona, the gladiator, is like, would you take a gladiator and put them in hospice, right? Would you take a gladiator and put them in charge of a daycare, right? Where they're going to interact with children all day? You would not do that. That is not a recipe for things going well, right? So grandma taking care of grandkids, gladiator is in the arena, right? And you wouldn't put those in opposite spaces because it would not go well. That is the healthcare business model. And what we have in most instances, especially for chiropractors, is we have the driven nurturer, which is the grandma, having one foot in the nurturing realm, right, of providing empathetic care to patients. And you are driven because you went to college, right? Just like the gladiator's driven. And then you have half a foot, if any foot at all, in the arena. And the problem with that is that you are in the arena whether you like it or not when you open a business. And so most of you are skating along the walls just trying to survive, while the C-suite executives of the big healthcare corporations are in the middle just slaughtering businesses, right? They're putting them down or they're buying them up and wrapping them up to get a bigger business. So that's the difference, okay? So what I'm going to tell you is that you can have both, right? I am an expression of both. The reason that I have had $6 million clinics, the reason that there's 125 new patients that come in every month, the reason that we see over 1,000 patients a week is because I'm both, right? And what that means is that I'm like you as a provider in that I do have deep empathetic care for people, right? But instead of just focusing on that and letting that shine through, that is the fuel that fuels the gladiator, right? So use the empathy, oh my gosh, Mary Smith is having back pain and she's going to have to go get, a 3-level fusion. And I don't want her to go through with that if I can help her. And if she does, I know that it's probably not going to be good per the statistics. And so what that should do is sort of rise up in you like a protective instinct that the driven empathetic has to protect Mary, right? And from that, then you get the gladiator on the outside protecting Mary, right? But many of you are existing just in the driven nurturer, right? So it's like you're afraid to tell Mary not to do that. You're afraid to sell Mary the package that she needs in order to make sure that she actually gets the care that could prevent that surgery long term, right? And that's because the driven nurturer, the driven empathetic in you, is afraid to do that, right? You're afraid of how Mary's going to think of you. But what would the gladiator think about Mary's response to that? The gladiator would not care, right? And so there's perversions on both sides, right? So the perversion on the driven nurturer is patients get underserved. They get recommended care plans that are too short in reality based on their actual function. They don't get the attention that they need. And what I mean by that is they don't get the optimal care level, right? Because most of the time what's happening is a driven nurturer is afraid of the pocketbook, right? Like, well, I know that Mary is on hard times, so I'm afraid to sell her. I'm afraid to tell her what she needs, right? And that's an issue. It's an issue not only for your business, but it's a huge issue for Mary. And so my argument to that is if you are underwriting care, right? Or if you are underselling care plans to patients that are not optimal, right? Like what you would provide to them if time was limitless and all the care was free and your energy was limitless, right? You are crossing an ethical barrier. I don't know how else to say it, right? Because it's your duty to provide her the optimal, but you're allowing your fear that's being derived from that empathetic nurturer to stop you from delivering the care or asking Mary for the money for the care or writing the plan for Mary or telling Mary that she needs to come in and this is why. You're stopping that process because you're being driven by this person. Now, the gladiator, on the other hand, would not have the empathy for Mary, right? But the gladiator would want the profit from Mary, right? And so you need to see there's a transient between these two things, and you need to be in the middle somewhere. You need to have some gladiator where it's like, no, I will get Mary better, and it will benefit my business, and it is the ethical thing to do, and so I'm going to do it, right? Like I'm going to go to battle for Mary. And you also need to have the other side because you don't want the perversion of the gladiator where it's like, we will do all things for profit regardless of how ethical it is, right? So you need to find a balance, okay? So that's number one. And I know that took a while to unpack, but I feel like that is the biggest thing that many chiropractors struggle with. And if you sit with yourself and you're honest with yourself, probably 90% of you are the driven nurturer, right? You're kind of the grandma entering the gladiator arena. And that's good. It's good that you're a driven nurturer, right? I don't want to say that it's not good and I don't want to frame it in a negative light. But what you need is some more gladiator in you if you want to have a successful business, right? And you have a moral obligation, you have an ethical obligation to have a successful chiropractic business. You have to, you must, you can, you have the skills to heal people with these, right? No other medical profession has that. And so you must have that drive to get them better. And if you do that and you combine it with the right kind of like pieces of the gladiatorial personality, then you'll have a successful practice. If you don't, then either your doors will be closed, you'll have a tiny practice, and what you'll do is you'll have under impact on the community than what you should. So that's mindset. That's like step number one, right? Of like growing a big practice. You have to have the right mindset. You have to address the personality issue, okay? Step number two, you cannot rely on a website. You cannot rely on typically like really just like any digital means, especially if you're small, to increase your practice volume, okay? Practice volume is a coefficient of multiple things. It's how many patients do you drive in? At what rate do they show up, right? So at what rate do they actually cross the threshold? And then at what rate do you close them on care? And then what is your plan length and duration? So, which is leading me into the next part. So when you're selling a patient a care plan, if you're not recommending the optimal, if it was free, unlimited time and energy for both of you, then you're doing yourself a disservice and you're doing your business a disservice, okay? Let me give you an example. So like, let's say you have a practice that's okay and it brings in 40 new patients every month, right? and you are a chiropractor who's writing typically, 4-week plans, right? It's like 2 times a week for 2 weeks and 1 time a week for 2 weeks. And that's what you sell your patients. How many patients do you have to replace every month just to keep that patient volume up, right? So your patient volume then would be roughly like 100 patient visits a week. That means you have to drive in 40 new patients every single month, right? In order to keep that volume, because all those people that you're driving in are falling out the backside after a month, right? And that's an issue. You cannot run a business, a chiropractic business for sure that way, right? Your reimbursement is not high enough in order for that to be feasible over the long term. And I know that your argument might be, well, they're going to come back for maintenance care, but many of you are not even putting them on a maintenance care schedule and holding them accountable to it. And so even if you put them on a maintenance care plan, right, and you see them once a month, like that versus even the 6 times a month of the plan that you're selling them initially is not enough, right? It does not add up in your numbers fast enough. Like if it takes, 10 minutes to adjust someone, how many maintenance people do you have to have in order to see 100 patient visits a week? Like you have to have a boatload of maintenance visit people, and they have to show up, right? And many of you are leaving it up to their own fruition. Come in when you need me. Come in when you feel like it. That is not the way. Now, let's get into this plan debate, okay? So many of you believe that it's your job, and I'm gonna ruffle some feathers here. So I don't mean this offensively, okay? I'm looking at this from a business sense in combination of what's optimal for a patient, because I am a patient, right? So many of you think that what your job is to get that patient out of pain. That is really not your job. And if you hearken back to your chiropractic college education, your job is not just to get that patient out of pain. Your job is to restore biomechanical function for the long term so that patient doesn't return to pain, right? And some of you are relying on the fact that that patient's going to return to pain, and so that's what's going to feed your maintenance schedule. I'm telling you, that is not the way to do it. That is so difficult to grow a big business. It is such a nightmare to scale your business doing it that way. And it's not even, in my opinion, the optimal thing for the patient, right? So let's go back to Mary, right? So let's say Mary comes in, she's had back pain for 5 years, right? Ask yourself and be honest. Is 6 adjustments, right, over 4 weeks, or even 8 adjustments or 12 adjustments over 4 weeks going to undo 5 years of pain and probably 15, 20 years of dysfunction? Is that going to undo that? If you're honest with yourself and you're remembering the principles, the biomechanical principles of your training, what you will say is no, that's not going to fix it, right? So if that's not going to fix it, now I have to ask you, why are you writing those plans then, right? If Mary Smith came into an office that I ran, Mary Smith would get a 3-month plan 3 times a week for 3 months, right? And she'd get rehab with it, because all of that is what's making up her pain, all right? And that 3-month plan would be written as a template, right? So it's like, we're gonna go 3 times a week for 3 months, and then we're gonna reassess her, right? Every so often. And as we reassess her, we're gonna let her results, her functional outcomes determine when she's ready for discharge. And then Mary Smith is gonna get on a prescribed maintenance schedule, right? So it's like, it's no different than if, like, let's say you're really out of shape. You've spent the last, 20 years on the couch and you wanna get back in shape. How many times a week are you gonna go to the gym? Are you gonna go 2 times a week and then 1 time a week and expect a result? No, because you know and I know that's not how physiology actually works, right? It's bouts over time that matters, right? And so that person who's like, I want to run a 5K, but I sat on the couch for 20 years, if they do six running trainings, right? 6 bouts, are they going to be able to run a 5K? No, they are not. Well, the same thing is true for pain patients, right? And so that's not going to fix them. Like, that person may be able to go from, jogging a block to jogging half a mile, maybe, but they're not going to be able to run a 5K. And the 5K is their goal, right? That would be their functional goal in this instance. Similarly, now what if that person who sat on the couch for 20 years trained 3 times a week and they trained for 3 months? What are the chances that they can run 5 miles? Pretty good, right? There's a pretty good opportunity for them to run 5 miles if that's how they train. Why? Because that's the truth of the physiology that undermines it, right? That's the substrate of the physiology. And you know this, but because what's happened is there's been piggyback knowledge off of previous chiropractors, and this even has gone into the schools. you're doing that as part of either A, fear of trying to, get them on a 36 visit plan, or B, you have forgotten what the true physiology and the biomechanics say, right? But I'm more apt to believe that it's fear. I'm more apt to believe that it's because you're piggybacking off of someone else's knowledge. Now, let's take those two patients out in the long run, okay? So the long run is this. So Mary Smith came in, saw practitioner A, and practitioner A got her out of pain in 4 weeks, right? She could move much better, got 6 visits. Mary Smith then transitions 3 months later, and she's back in pain. Now, what is Mary Smith's belief about the practitioner, right? The belief is that that's good for a Band-Aid fix, and she may come back and do it again, but she's not going to keep doing that, right? Eventually, she's going to be like, well, obviously chiropractic's not good, not enough, and so now I need to go to the next level, right? I need to go to surgery. I need to go back to my GP and get some prescriptions. I need to do something else because I keep getting back in pain. And so what has happened to you as a doctor of chiropractic is your credibility has just been decreased, right? And this is part of what's happening to the chiropractic profession in general. This is part of the reason why the credibility, it feels like your credibility is low, is because we're following these treatment models that are not long-term successes, right? Now, that's the most likely outcome of that 6 visit, 4 week plan for Mary, okay? Now, what's the most likely outcome if Mary came in for 36 visits, 3 times a week for 12 weeks? And then she picked up a maintenance plan similar to the previous one, once a month, right? What would Mary's experience be? Well, if you look at least the physical therapy data, what it says is that plans that last 12 weeks, their reincidence of pain is dramatically lower after a year than plans that last 6 to 9 visits, which is the typical even in the PT realm. Now, why are we not following that data? You can look it up. You can look it up on Google Scholar, and you'll find it. Why are we not following that data? It is the information that we learned, right? That people learned in chiropractic college. It's the information that was learned. And I'm going to say that it's because of that driven nurturer personality, right? It's driven, but it's so empathetic that it gets crushed when money gets talked about, or it gets crushed when you have the conversation about the plan and their eyes are like, wow, that's expensive. It gets crushed when Mary starts falling off of her plan and you can't seem to get her back in the motion of it, right? But that Mary Smith that did that 12-week, 3 times a week plan, when she doesn't have pain, out past a year, what is she going to think about chiropractic? Well, she's going to think you're the best, right? She'll be like, oh my gosh, they got me better, right? They got me better and I haven't returned to pain. That's what she's going to tell her friends. That's what she's going to tell her neighbor. That's what she's going to tell her family. The other Mary Smith that only got 4 weeks worth of visits is not going to say that. Eventually, she's going to leave your practice because you didn't actually fix what was going on to the degree that it could be fixed, right? So that's my pitch to you about solving the new patient in and out cycle, right? So we get this new patient, we get them on a plan, they go for 4 weeks, and then they're out, right? And so they have to be replaced every 4 weeks. All 40 of those patients have to get replaced. And what happens is you just have a really tiny clinic, and your patients are not that satisfied long-term. And I mean that by percentage of total patients, right? So it's maybe you have 60% of patients who are satisfied. Well, in the clinics that I run, over 98% of patients are satisfied, right? And that does mean that we have to have some skills and talking to them a report of findings in order to make sure they understand so they can get onboarded on this type of plan. But when they do, they leave satisfied and they tell everybody about us, right? So that's how you start getting referrals in, right? Although that's not the main source of your new patients, right? Some practices run heavy on referrals, but in order to get, well over 100 new patients every month, you cannot just depend on referrals. There has to be another thing, right? And that comes down to sales and marketing. But I would say the biggest roadblock that I see after speaking with hundreds of chiropractors is just that little sequence right there, right? It's personality, right? It's the driven nurturer versus the gladiator. They're too much of the driven nurturer. And so then they get fear to sell a patient the optimal care that they would recommend, regardless of the money and the time. That's what you should do. That's what all the other medical providers do. They don't care if it costs $15,000 a month. This is what they need, so this is what I'm going to recommend, right? So personality conflict, that leads to fear, that leads to piggybacking off of what other chiropractors have done that have big clinics, like maybe up to 1 million, most likely around 500, 600,000 a year, that see, 200, maybe 250 PVs a week at max. And so then they just start following this trend. Well, the problem that poses is you have to be an insane marketer in order to continue to have a practice that does that. Now, if that person has a 3-month plan, how many new patients do I need to develop every month to keep my practice at what it'd be about, be like around 100 PVs a week? I should be 120 PVs a week. How many do I need? I need like 15, right? So instead of 40, I need like 15, in accounting for drop off, right? So can you get 15 new patients a month and have them be on 3 times a week, 12-week plans as a solo chiropractor, no marketer, no digital marketing, and all of that? Yeah, you can do that. You can do that, absolutely. But to get 40 when you're a full-time provider, right? Off of referrals, hoping that it's like coming in off your website, that's just most likely not going to happen, right? And for those of you who that is happening, I applaud you, but 40 new patients a month is still tiny. And I don't mean to offend you, but it is just tiny. And what you'll notice is that I keep referring to this in size increments, right? I'm using money as like the increments, or I'm using patient visits. The numbers just tell the ultimate truth, right? So when I say $6 million practice, I'm not looking at that as purely like profit. I'm looking at that as a predefined marker of how much care we have given and a really general umbrella amount of how much life change we have doled out, right? And so it's really important that you get your mindset right, that you're not just the driven empathetic, the driven nurturer, but you also pull out some gladiator and you stop being reasonable with your patients and allowing them to dictate their care. You're the provider, you dictate their care. That's why they're coming to you. You're the expert. But chiropractors everywhere have gotten in this habit of allowing patients to dictate their care. Don't do that, right? It's unethical. It's not right? Like they would never dare to go in to their orthopedic surgeon and say, no, I want this, right? What would their orthopedic surgeon say? They'd be like, get out of here. I'm not giving you that, right? That's part of the reason why they're so credible, right? Because they control the care spectrum, right? Well, chiropractors should control the care spectrum too. So all that to say, this is a huge reason why your practice is not growing and why it's not recession proof, right? If you only need to get 15 new patients every month to keep your practice at a decent level, right? And it's like 120 new patients or 120 PVs a week. That's not big by any means, but it's like, if that's where you're currently at, can you get 15 new patients a month during a recession? I would sure hope so, right? Can you get 15 new patients a month during a pandemic? I would sure hope so. We were getting 80 to 120, okay? That's part of how that works, right? That's part of what needs to happen. So in short, just to like summarize this really quick for you, personality, less driven nurturer, more gladiator, right? Because they're fighting for the same thing. Just like the example I used. Mary Smith is in back pain. It's my job to step in as a gladiator and protect her from more back pain, okay? So personality, your plan frequency and duration needs to match what the data says. Your job is not to get them out of pain right now. That will come regardless. Your job is to keep them out of pain long-term so that that person raises your credibility when they say, yes, Dr. So-and-so fixed me, and I don't really care what you say about chiropractic, like what he did worked, right? Versus 3 months later, Mary Smith is starting to have an achy back again, even though she did the little plan and she did 1 time a month, and Mary Smith is thinking, man, this dude's a quack, like this doesn't work, right? That's not what you want. So you need to set yourself up to build credibility through the truth of the physiology and the biomechanics. And some of you are going to disagree with me. And what I would have to ask you back is, did you have a 98 to 99% success rate? In fact, it was more than 99%. Out of 100 patients, less than 1 on average did not meet their functional goals, right? And their functional goals are, I want to be able to walk this long. I want to be able to lift weights. I want to be able to chase my grandkids. I want to go to the zoo with my grandkids and not have to take a wheelchair, right? Because my back is hurting or my knee is hurting or whatever. Is that the level of outcome that you have? And do you have a greater than 95% compliance to plans, right? If you don't, then you may want to take a step back and do a little bit of self-reflection on why not, right? And this is not, like I said, this is not to be offensive. I'm really trying to help you guys. But what has happened is all of this knowledge has been piggybacked off of other chiropractors rather than scraping all the knowledge in the business realm and pulling it in and using that with the data, right? With the information, the studies, and combining that and then executing on it. That's all you have to do, okay? So once again, personality, get some more Gladiator. Stop being afraid to recommend the optimal. Give them payment plans if that's what you have to do. Do whatever, okay? Stop not recommending the optimal. And what that will do is it'll make you more recession proof and it'll build your business. You shouldn't have to replace all of your planned patients every month, right? Like you just shouldn't have to do that. Even if you went to 6 weeks, what that would do is drive your new patients down to I think you need 28 or something like that every month, right? That's a significant difference. My recommendation would be to do 12-week plans 3 times a week for everybody, unless they're an 18-year-old with no injuries, right? Then you can do 8 weeks, 3 times a week. But then let the patient's functional goal progress dictate when they get discharged, right? So if Mary Smith comes in and she just kicks butt and she's able to do all the functional goal things that she stated at 10 weeks, Mary Smith gets discharged at 10 weeks. But you don't want to have the conversation with Mary Smith at the end of 4 weeks and she's still in pain and be I'm sorry, Mary, I think we're going to need another 4 weeks. And we're going to need more money, by the way, too. Patients don't like that. But what they do like is, oh, Mary Smith, great job. You got out in 10 weeks. You're feeling amazing. Here's a refund. This is your maintenance schedule. We're going to see you 1 time a month. And we're going to do that because we want to make sure that you don't regress, right? We just want to make sure you don't regress. We're going to track you, okay? We're going to continue to track you because it's a lot easier to get on top of this right away if you have something that sets you back rather than what you've done in the past where it's you run it completely out of oil and it blows up, right? And so that's a very easy conversation to have and that will make you more successful. So this is how you can make your practice recession proof, pandemic proof, etc. It's not the specifics, right? It's not the skills. We can teach you the skills of how to sell, how to do a proper report of findings, how to drive new patients in, all of that. But this is the mindset things that need to happen in order for you to actually grow the business that you want. So thanks for listening to the podcast. We'll get into more of the skill-based stuff in another podcast, but this is the foundational requirement. All right? Okay, have a good day.